The 7-year-old was screaming, collapsing on cold marble while 300 of the city's most powerful people froze in shock. 3 nannies had failed. A specialist had failed. Her billionaire mother could only watch helplessly as her blind daughter's crisis shattered the most important night of her career. Then a janitor dropped his cleaning cart and whispered, "Can I play you a song?" 4 years ago, grief had made him invisible, but the moment his fingers touched the piano, everything he'd buried came roaring back. In 5 minutes, a desperate song would calm a child, crack open 3 lives, and reveal the secret the janitor thought he'd buried forever. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The Lunex Technologies annual charity gala was the kind of event that made headlines. Crystal chandeliers, designer gowns, tuxedos, and power. Tech moguls and venture capitalists whose single decisions moved markets. At the center of it all stood Elena Voss, 33 and untouchable, her long blonde hair pulled into a sleek twist that matched the sharp lines of her ice blue dress. She'd built Lunex from a startup to a billion-dollar empire in under a decade. Tonight's gala had already raised $3 million for children's education initiatives. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't.
The first scream cut through the polite murmur of conversation like glass shattering. Penny Voss, 7 years old with wild ginger curls escaping from her ponytail, stood frozen near the chocolate fountain. Her small hands flew to her ears, fingers pressing hard against the sides of her head. The world had become too much. Echoing voices bouncing off marble floors, the clink of champagne glasses multiplying into chaos, perfumes and colognes mixing into a suffocating cloud, the rumble of laughter she couldn't attach to faces she couldn't see. "No, no, no, no!" Penny's voice pitched higher, raw with panic. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Elena moved fast, her heels clicking sharply across the ballroom floor, but she wasn't fast enough. Penny's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the cold marble, her whole body shaking as sobs tore from her throat. The elegant evening ground to a halt. 300 pairs of eyes locked onto the CEO's daughter having a complete meltdown in the middle of her mother's triumphant night. Elena felt her chest tighten. Not here, not now. The first nanny, Maria, who'd been with them for 2 years, rushed forward with Penny's favorite stuffed bear, the one with the worn velvet ears. She knelt down, her voice soft and practiced. "Penny, sweetheart, Mr. Buttons is here. Feel him, honey. It's okay." Penny's hand knocked the bear away. Her screams sharpened, turning into a high-pitched wail that made several guests wince. The second nanny tried next. She pulled out a set of textured toys from her bag, things that usually worked, things that provided sensory input Penny could control. "Look, Penny, remember these? The soft one, the bumpy one?" "Get away!" Penny thrashed, her small fists hitting air. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a wave. "Is that the CEO's daughter? Poor thing. Where's the mother?" Elena stood there, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. She'd built an empire on control, on strategy, on seeing 3 moves ahead. But here, in front of investors and board members and journalists, she was utterly powerless. Her daughter was drowning and she couldn't reach her. The third nanny attempted redirection, crouching low and speaking in gentle, measured tones. "Penny, let's go to the quiet room. Remember? The soft chairs, your favorite music." The crying intensified. Murmurs turned to concerned glances. Elena felt heat creep up her neck. She'd prepared for hostile takeovers, for market crashes, for corporate espionage. Not this. Never this. Then a woman stepped forward, a child specialist from the crowd. She knelt beside Penny, hands moving through practiced techniques, pressure points, grounding, sensory regulation. "Penny, I want you to breathe with me. In through your nose." Dr. Smith demonstrated, her voice steady as stone. For a moment, just a heartbeat, Penny's screams quieted to sobs. Elena felt a flicker of hope. Then Penny's cries exploded louder than before, as if the brief quiet had only given her lungs more power. The wail echoed off the vaulted ceiling, bouncing back down on them like judgment. Dr. Smith's professional mask slipped for just a second, uncertainty flashing across her features. That's when Elena knew. If the expert couldn't reach her daughter, nothing would.
She felt the stares like physical weight, board members exchanging glances, investors checking their watches, journalists' fingers probably itching toward their phones. Tomorrow's headlines were writing themselves. Billion-dollar CEO can't control her own daughter. Lunex Technologies Gala descends into chaos. Elena Voss had never felt so small.
Across the ballroom, through a service entrance most guests would never notice, Wade Kent pushed his cleaning cart through the doorway. 36 years old, wearing the uniform that made him invisible to people like the ones filling this room. His short brown hair was slightly damped from the exertion of hauling trash bins, and his hands gripped the cart's handle with deliberate steadiness. He'd been emptying the waste bins in the corporate offices upstairs when the event coordinator's frantic voice crackled through his radio. All staff maintain positions. Do not enter the main ballroom until further notice. That's when he heard it. Even through the heavy service door, even over the ambient noise of the building's ventilation system, a child's scream, desperate and afraid. Wade froze. The scream came again, not anger, not a tantrum, pure terror. The sound of a child drowning in a world they couldn't control, crying out for someone, anyone to save them. Wade knew that sound. He'd heard it once before, 4 years ago, and he'd been too late. His hands went white-knuckled on the cart's handle. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away. He'd spent 4 years building walls specifically to avoid moments like this. 4 years staying invisible. 4 years making sure he never had to hear a child's desperate cry for help ever again. But that scream, it wasn't just fear he heard. It was abandonment. The terror of being alone in your worst moment while the world watched and did nothing. Wade's feet started moving before he could stop them. He abandoned the cart. He didn't know what he could do, didn't know if he could help. But he couldn't be too late. Not again. Wade pushed through the door. The ballroom's grandeur hit him like a physical force. The wealth, the power, the desperate sounds of a child in crisis echoing off marble and crystal. He saw the crowd first, a mass of expensive fabric and judgment. Then the cluster of people around a small figure on the floor. A little girl with ginger curls, her face red and streaked with tears, her whole body rigid with panic. 3 women in nannies' uniforms looking helpless. An older woman in professional attire kneeling nearby, her therapeutic techniques clearly failing. And standing above them all, a blonde woman in an ice blue dress, her expression caught between fury and desperation. Wade's feet kept moving. A security guard stepped into his path. "Sir, you can't." "Please," Wade heard himself say, his voice rough from disuse in social situations. "Let me try." "You need to return to your station," but Wade was already moving past him, driven by something he couldn't name and wouldn't fight. The crowd parted, some in surprise, some in offense that a janitor was walking through their midst. Wade didn't care. He could only see the little girl, could only hear her cries mixing with memories of a familiar laughter. He dropped to his knees beside her, ignoring the shocked gasps around him. The nannies backed away, uncertain. The specialist stood up, her professional mask slipping further. The woman in the blue dress, the CEO, stared at him with ice-cold eyes that held a warning. Wade ignored them all. He leaned close to the little girl, close enough that his voice would cut through her panic, and whispered 6 words that had been building in his chest for 4 years. "Can I play you a song?" Penny's screaming faltered, stuttering into broken sobs. Her unseeing eyes turned toward the sound of his voice, calm, steady, safe. Wade reached out slowly, telegraphing his movements even though she couldn't see them. His hand touched hers, small, hot, trembling. "I know the world is too loud right now," he said softly, just to her. "Let me make it quieter." Penny's fingers curled around his, holding on like he was an anchor in a storm. Wade stood, still holding her hand, and looked around the ballroom until his eyes found it. There, on a raised platform near the center of the room, stood a concert grand piano. Black and gleaming, probably worth more than he'd make in 5 years. It had sat there all night, decorative and silent, a showpiece for the wealthy to admire. Wade's breath caught. 4 years, his mind screamed. You haven't touched a piano in 4 years. You can't. You'll fall apart. You'll remember everything. But Penny's hand squeezed his, and Wade started walking.
The crowd pulled back like water before a ship's bow, their shocked whispers following him. "Is that the janitor? What is he doing? Someone stop him!" "No!" The blonde woman's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp with authority. Elena Voss held up one hand, her eyes locked on Wade with an intensity that should have burned. Let him try. Wade led Penny to the piano bench. The polished wood gleamed under the chandeliers. His hands shook as he helped her settle beside him, her small frame dwarfed by the instrument. For a moment, Wade just sat there staring at the keys. 88 black and white pieces that had once been his entire world. He'd avoided pianos like they were landmines for 4 years, walked past music stores with his eyes down, changed channels when concerts came on TV. Now 300 people watched him in absolute silence. Penny's hand found his arm, holding on. Wade lifted his hands. They trembled as they hovered over the keys. Muscle memory warred with grief. Technique battled trauma. His fingers touched down on middle C, and the single note rang out across the ballroom, clear and pure. Something inside Wade's chest unlocked. His hands moved.
The melody that emerged wasn't the showy Rachmaninoff or complex Chopin that used to fill concert halls when Wade Kent was still a name that mattered. It was simpler than that, gentler. It was the lullaby he'd composed for his son, Caleb. Wade had written it during Sarah's pregnancy, late at night when he couldn't sleep for excitement. He'd played it the night Caleb was born, had played it every night after that, watching his son's eyes drift closed, watching tiny fingers reach toward the sound. He'd sworn he'd never play it again. But now his fingers found the notes like coming home, and the music spilled out, tender and warm, full of love that had nowhere else to go. The melody danced and lilted, rose and fell like a heartbeat, like a breath, like a father's arms rocking a child to sleep. Penny's sobs quieted, then stopped. The ballroom held its breath. Penny's face, still wet with tears, transformed. The tension in her small body melted away. Her head tilted toward the music, and slowly, impossibly, a smile spread across her features, pure and radiant like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. She could feel the vibrations through the bench, Wade realized, could sense the resonance in her bones. The music wasn't just sound to her, it was tangible, real, something she could hold on to in her darkness. Wade's vision blurred, but his hands never faltered. The years fell away. He wasn't a janitor anymore. He wasn't a broken man hiding from his pain. He was just Wade, playing for a child who needed him, the way he'd once played for Caleb. The melody shifted, adding complexity, not to show off, but to give Penny more. His right hand carried the main theme, while his left hand wove in harmonies, creating layers of sound that built a world around her, a world that was safe, gentle, full of light. Around the ballroom, Wade dimly registered movement. People pulling out phones, but not to check messages, to record. Women pressing hands to their mouths, men blinking hard. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, frozen by the unexpected beauty unfolding in front of them. Elena Voss stood like a statue, her ice composure finally cracking. Tears tracked down her face, cutting through perfect makeup, and she didn't bother wiping them away. Wade built the melody to its crescendo, not loud, but full, rich with emotion he'd kept locked away for 4 years. Then, gently, like laying a sleeping child in a crib, he brought it back down, softer, sweeter, until the final note hung in the air like a prayer. Silence. Pure, absolute silence. Then Penny laughed, a sound of such genuine joy that it hit Wade like a physical blow. She turned her unseeing eyes toward where she sensed him and threw her small arms around his neck, holding on tight. "That was beautiful," she whispered against his shoulder. "It felt like flying." Wade's arms came up automatically, returning the hug, and something broke open inside his chest. 4 years of held-back tears, 4 years of carefully maintained numbness, 4 years of refusing to feel anything because feeling meant remembering, and remembering meant drowning. He was drowning now, but somehow it felt like breathing. The ballroom erupted. The applause wasn't the polite pattering of society events. It was thunderous, genuine, shocked.
People stood from their tables. Some were crying openly. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The journalists' phones were definitely out now, capturing everything. Wade barely heard it. He just held this little girl he didn't know, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, and thought about his son, Caleb, about how Caleb would have loved Penny's laugh, about how maybe, just maybe, the music hadn't died with his son. Maybe it had just been waiting. Penny pulled back, her hands finding Wade's face, reading his features with her fingers the way she read the world. Her smile widened. "That was so pretty," she said. "Can you play another one?" Wade couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He managed a small nod, even though she couldn't see it. Maybe next time. Then he felt another presence nearby, a subtle shift in the air, the scent of expensive perfume. He looked up into eyes the color of winter sky. Elena Voss stood there, her carefully constructed armor shattered. For the first time in years, since the divorce that had turned her heart to ice, her expression held something soft, something vulnerable. "Thank you," she said, and her voice cracked on the words. How did you do that?" Wade gently extracted himself from Penny's embrace, standing on legs that felt unsteady. He was aware suddenly of the janitor's uniform, of the 300 people watching, of the massive gulf between who he'd been and who he'd become. He swallowed hard. "I just listened to what she needed. No one else could reach her, not the nannies, not the specialist, but you." Elena's eyes searched his face like she was trying to solve an equation. "You play like a professional, like someone who's done this their whole life." Wade's jaw tightened. "I should get back to work." "Wait!" Elena's hand shot out, not quite touching him, but stopping him with the gesture alone. "Please, I need to know. Who taught you to play like that?" The question hit harder than she could know. Who had taught him? His grandmother, in a tiny apartment in Queens, on an out-of-tune upright piano. Juilliard professors who'd called him gifted. Life, which had taught him that beautiful things could be taken away in 30 seconds of inattention. "It doesn't matter," Wade said quietly. Penny's hand found his again, holding on. "Don't go," she said, and the simple plea in her voice nearly undid him. Wade looked down at her, this brave little girl who'd just survived a storm, and felt something shift. For 4 years, he'd been running from anything that reminded him of Caleb, avoiding children, avoiding music, avoiding anything that made him feel. But Penny's hand in his didn't feel like remembering. It felt like a different kind of hope. "I need to finish my shift," Wade said gently, crouching down to Penny's level. "But maybe," he glanced up at Elena, whose Ice Queen mask was nowhere to be seen, "maybe I could come back sometime, play more songs for you." Penny's face lit up like he'd promised her the moon. Elena nodded, something passing across her expression that Wade couldn't read. Relief? Gratitude? Something more complicated. "Yes," she said firmly, then softer. "Please." Wade carefully extracted his hand from Penny's grip, feeling the loss immediately. The crowd was still watching, still whispering. He'd made himself visible, something he'd spent 4 years carefully avoiding. Tomorrow, he'd probably regret this. Tomorrow, the exposure would feel like too much. But tonight, walking back across that ballroom floor with his heart cracked open and bleeding, Wade felt something he hadn't felt since the day they lowered Caleb's tiny coffin into the ground. He felt alive. Elena watched the janitor disappear through the service door, then looked down at her daughter. Penny sat on the piano bench, her fingers tracing the keys gently, pressing them softly to hear the quiet notes. "That was nice," Penny said simply. Elena knelt down in her expensive dress, not caring about the marble floor, and pulled her daughter close. Around them, the gala was trying to restart, conversations picking up, the moment passing. But Elena couldn't move. "Would you like to learn to play like that?" Elena asked softly. Penny's smile widened. "Yes, can I?" Elena looked toward the service door where the janitor had disappeared. Her mind kept replaying the image, those skilled, trembling hands, that expression of barely controlled grief, the way he'd understood Penny when every expert had failed.
Who was he?
3 days later, Elena found herself doing something she never did, leaving the office early. She'd spent those 3 days trying to return to normal. Board meetings, strategy sessions, the usual corporate warfare that had become her entire life. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Penny smile at the piano, heard that melody that had somehow pierced through her daughter's panic like a key fitting a lock. The janitor's employee file sat on her desk. Wade Kent, 36, worked night shift maintenance for the building management company Lunex contracted. No college education listed. Previous employment, various custodial positions across the city. Nothing about music. Nothing to explain those skills. Elena had made some calls, discreet ones. The building supervisor had been surprised by her interest. Wade? Yeah, he's solid. Shows up on time, keeps to himself. Why? How long has he worked for you? About 3.5 years. Never caused problems, never missed a shift. Quiet guy. 4 years, Elena thought. Right around the same period when her own marriage was imploding with her husband's betrayal, and Penny was just a toddler struggling with a world she couldn't see. She found Wade emptying trash bins in the executive hallway at 7 p.m., an hour before the night shift officially started. He moved with efficient precision, nothing wasted, every motion economical. Mr. Kent. Wade's head snapped up, and for a moment Elena saw something flash across his face. Recognition, then wariness, then a careful blankness that she recognized all too well. It was the same mask she wore in boardrooms. Miss Voss. His voice was neutral, professional. I was hoping I could speak with you. Buy you a coffee, perhaps. Wade's hands tightened on the trash bag he was holding. I'm working. I cleared it with your supervisor. That got a reaction, a tiny flicker of surprise, followed by something that might have been annoyance. Elena realized she'd overstepped, used her power in a way that gave him no real choice, the kind of corporate maneuvering she was famous for.
She softened her voice. Please, I just want to talk. About Penny. About what you did. Wade was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was trying to decide something. Finally, he nodded once. There's a cafe 2 blocks down. I can meet you there in 20 minutes. Thank you. Elena waited at a corner table, her usual vanilla latte cooling in front of her, while her mind raced through the questions she wanted to ask. The cafe was deliberately modest, not the kind of place where she'd run into board members or investors. Neutral ground. Wade arrived exactly 20 minutes later, no longer in the janitor's uniform. He wore jeans and a plain black t-shirt, and his shoulders were tense, like he was already regretting this. He ordered black coffee, paid for it himself despite Elena's offer, and sat down across from her with the careful posture of someone ready to bolt. The silence stretched. How is Penny? Wade asked finally, his eyes fixed on his coffee cup. The question surprised Elena. Not, why did you call me here, or what do you want? Just concern for her daughter. She's been asking about you, Elena admitted. She wants to know when the music man is coming back. Wade's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. She's talked more in the past 3 days than she has in months. About the music, about how it felt. You did something the specialists couldn't. I should get going. Wade started to stand. Wait! Elena's hand shot across the table, not touching him, but stopping him with the gesture. Please, I just need to understand how you knew what to do. Wade remained half standing, conflict playing across his features. After a long moment, he sat back down, but his body language screamed flight risk. I didn't know, he said flatly. I just played. That wasn't just playing, that was professional-level skill. Elena leaned forward slightly. Where did you learn? Wade's hands wrapped tighter around his coffee cup. Does it matter? Yes. Why? Because my daughter hasn't stopped smiling for 3 days, and I need to know if this was luck or if you actually understand something about her that I've been missing. Wade stared into his coffee for so long Elena thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I used to play. A long time ago. Elena waited, giving him space. Professionally, Wade added, the word coming out like he was confessing a crime. How professionally? Wade's jaw worked. Does it matter? You keep asking that. Because I don't see why my past is relevant to helping your daughter.
The deflection was clear, but Elena recognized it for what it was: protection. She'd built her own walls. She knew how they worked. "You're right," she said softly, changing tactics. "It's not about your past. It's about—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "My ex-husband left when Penny was 2, said she was defective, that he needed a normal child." Wade's eyes snapped up to hers for the first time, shock breaking through his careful blankness. Elena hadn't planned to say that. The words just came out, raw and unfiltered, but something about Wade's guarded pain called to her own. "He had an affair," she continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Got his mistress pregnant. When I confronted him, he said Penny was my incomplete mistake to deal with, that he deserved a child who could actually see him. That's—" Stopped. His hands clenched into fists. "I'm sorry. That's unforgivable." "I turned ice cold after that," Elena said. "Built walls so high nothing could get in. Threw myself into work because that's what I could control. But Penny," her voice cracked slightly, "I've been trying to fix her for 7 years instead of just hearing her. You showed me that in 5 minutes." Silence settled between them, heavy with shared understanding. Wade's defenses seemed to crack, just slightly. "I had a son." The words were so quiet Elena almost missed them. "Had?" she whispered. Wade's face went carefully blank, but Elena saw the muscles in his throat work as he swallowed hard. "His name was Caleb. He was 5 when he died." Elena's breath caught. She stayed perfectly still, afraid that any movement would make Wade shut down completely. "4 years ago," Wade continued, his voice hollow. "Family trip. There was an accident at the lake, and—" He stopped abruptly, his knuckles white around the coffee cup. "He drowned." "Wade, I'm so—" "Don't." Wade's voice was sharp. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were distant. "I don't need sympathy. It doesn't change anything." "Is that why you became a janitor?" Elena asked gently. "You were walking away from something." Wade's laugh was bitter. "I was running. There's a difference." "From what?" Wade stood up abruptly. "I should go." "Please don't." Elena's voice was firm, but not demanding. "I'm not trying to pry into wounds you don't want to open." Wade's hand trembled as he set down the coffee cup. For a long moment he stood there, clearly warring with himself. Then, slowly, he sat back down. "I was a classical pianist," he said finally, the words clearly costing him. "Juilliard trained, won multiple competitions, collegiate and regional competitions. I was making a name for myself in the industry. I had my first Carnegie Hall performance scheduled." His voice cracked. "It was supposed to be my big break, my chance to go mainstream. And then Caleb died, and I—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I canceled everything, walked away. My wife and I, we couldn't even look at each other after. We both blamed ourselves, blamed each other. The divorce came 6 weeks after the funeral. I sold everything, relocated, took the first anonymous job I could find." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but forced them back. "The lullaby I played for Penny," Wade continued, his voice barely a whisper. "I wrote it for Caleb, played it for him every night before bed." "And you haven't played since, until the gala?" "No." "That must have taken incredible courage." "It wasn't courage." Wade finally met her eyes, and the pain in them was devastating. "I heard your daughter screaming, and I heard—" He stopped, his breath shaky. "I heard sounds I never want to hear again. Sounds from 4 years ago that I can't get out of my head, and I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought maybe this time I could help. This time I wouldn't be too late." The confession hung in the air between them. "You saved her," Elena whispered. "You were exactly on time." Wade's eyes glistened, but he blinked it away. "Your daughter deserves someone who can teach her without falling apart. Maybe she deserves someone who understands that it's okay to fall apart sometimes, that broken doesn't mean useless." Wade studied her face for a long moment. "Is that what you tell yourself?" The question was direct, almost challenging. "No," Elena admitted. "I tell myself that broken means vulnerable, and vulnerable means weak. But watching you with Penny?" She paused. "Maybe I've been wrong." They sat in silence, two broken people recognizing each other's wounds. "I have a favor to ask," Elena said, finally. Wade waited.
"Would you teach Penny piano? Not as a janitor who I'm pressuring, as a teacher, properly paid on your terms. She hasn't stopped talking about the music, and I think," Elena's voice softened, "I think maybe it could help her, the way it helped you at the gala, a way to express what words can't reach." "I can't," Wade said sharply, his voice strained. Elena's face fell. "Wade, you don't understand." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Playing for Penny that night, that was instinct, desperation. I didn't think about it. But teaching her, week after week, that's different. That's choosing to go back to something I walked away from for a reason." "You helped her once," Wade's voice cracked. "I helped her once, and it almost broke me. You didn't see me after. You didn't see me sitting in my apartment at 3 a.m., shaking, because I could still feel those keys under my fingers, and all I could think about was Caleb." Elena stood too, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm not asking you to go back to who you were. I'm asking you to help my daughter be who she's meant to be." "I can't be what she needs." "You already are." Elena took a step closer. "Wade, in 7 years, I've never seen her light up the way she did with you. The specialists, the therapies, the expensive programs, none of it reached her, but you did. In 5 minutes, you gave her something I've been trying to buy for 7 years. Wade's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "And what happens when I can't do it anymore? When the memories are too much and I have to walk away? You want me to break your daughter's heart because I can't keep my own together?"
"Then you stop. No guilt, no expectations." Elena's voice softened. "I'm not asking you to be whole, Wade. I'm asking you to show up. Once a week, just for her. Not for me, not to revive your career, just for Penny." "I can pay any amount," Elena blurted out, suddenly realizing the weight of her words. Wade's jaw tightened, his entire body tense with the war happening inside him. "I don't want your money," he said finally, his voice rough. "If I do this, and I'm not saying I will, but if I do this, it's not a job. It's not me going back to being a pianist. It's just helping a kid who needs it. Elena, I mean it." He met her eyes, and the intensity in them made Elena's breath catch. "The moment you pay me, it becomes professional. It becomes what I used to be, and I can't be that person again." Elena nodded slowly, understanding. "Okay, no payment." Wade stood up abruptly. "But I still can't. I'm sorry. I can't." "She asked me if you were coming back," Elena said quietly. Wade froze, his hand on the back of the chair. "Every night before bed, she asks if the music man is coming back. And last night she asked me—" Elena stopped, swallowing hard. "She asked me if maybe you didn't come back because she wasn't good enough, because she's broken." Wade's breath caught audibly. "I told her that wasn't true," Elena said. "I told her you were busy, that you had other things to do. But Wade," her voice dropped to barely a whisper, "this morning I found her at the piano. She was just sitting there, not playing, just sitting with her hands on the keys. And when I asked what she was doing, she said she was trying to remember exactly how your song felt, because she's afraid she's going to forget." Wade's hands gripped the chair so hard his knuckles went white.
"She's 7 years old," Elena continued, and now there were tears in her voice. "And she's terrified that the one person who made her feel safe is never coming back. That the one thing that reached her when nothing else could is gone forever. And I don't know how to stop." Wade's voice was raw, broken. "Please stop." But Elena couldn't stop. The words were pouring out now. She said the music made her feel like she wasn't alone in the dark anymore. That for 5 minutes she could feel the whole world through your song. And now she thinks I said stop. Wade's voice cracked like breaking glass. The cafe went silent. Other patrons turned to stare. Wade stood there, trembling, his breath coming in short gasps. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. "You don't understand," he whispered, and his voice was wrecked. The last thing Caleb said to me, the last words my son ever spoke, he asked me to play the lullaby. We were at the lake house, and he was going to bed, and he asked for the song. And I said, Wade's voice broke completely. I said, later, buddy. Daddy's tired. I promised him later. And then he was gone. And there was no later, and I never... He couldn't finish. His whole body shook with the effort of holding himself together. I never played it for him again, Wade finally managed. I never kept that promise. And now you're asking me to make another promise to another child, and what happens when I fail her too? What happens when the memories are too much and I walk away and she's sitting at a piano wondering why she wasn't enough? I can't. His voice shattered. I can't fail another kid. I can't be too late again. Elena stood up slowly, her own tears falling freely now. Wade, you weren't too late. What happened to Caleb wasn't... I was too late for the lullaby. I was too late for later. And if I walk away from Penny after starting this, I'll be too late for her too. The silence stretched between them, heavy with impossible weight.
Then Elena said, very quietly, "What if this is your chance not to be too late?" Wade's head snapped up. What if Penny sitting at that piano trying to remember your song is your later? Elena's voice was gentle but unrelenting. What if this is the promise you actually can keep? Wade stared at her, and something in his expression cracked wide open. You can't bring Caleb back, Elena continued softly. You can't go back and play him that lullaby, but you can show up for Penny. You can be the person who doesn't leave her sitting in the dark, wondering if she mattered. You can keep this promise, Wade. You can be on time. Wade's breathing was ragged, his entire body shaking. He closed his eyes, and Elena watched him fight the war happening inside him, grief and fear and desperate hope all battling for dominance. When he opened his eyes, they were raw and red, but something had shifted. "One lesson," he said, and his voice was barely audible. "I'll do one lesson. Wade, if I can't handle more after that, you tell Penny..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "You tell her it's not because of her. You tell her she's extraordinary, and this is about me, not her. Promise me." "I promise." Wade nodded once, sharp and broken, like he'd just agreed to walk through fire. He turned toward the door, his movements jerky with barely contained emotion. At the door, he paused without looking back. "She's not broken," he said hoarsely. "Tell her the music man said she's not broken. She's just waiting for the world to catch up to how special she is." Then he left, the door closing behind him with a soft chime. Elena sat back down, her legs suddenly weak. She stared at her cooling latte and realized her hands were shaking. She'd just asked a broken man to pick up the pieces of what destroyed him. But it wasn't just that. She'd shown him the promise he'd failed to keep for his son could be kept for her daughter. And somehow, impossibly, that had been enough. The first lesson happened on a Saturday afternoon, and Wade showed up at Elena's penthouse apartment 15 minutes early, his stomach a knot of anxiety. The penthouse was exactly what he'd expected. Modern, minimalist, expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows, museum-quality furniture, art worth more than his yearly salary. But scattered throughout were unexpected touches. Textured rugs in bright colors, a corner of instruments, railings at child height so Penny could navigate independently. Elena met him at the door in jeans and a soft sweater, her blonde hair down instead of pulled back. It made her look younger, less like the Ice Queen CEO and more like a person. "She's been vibrating with excitement all morning," Elena said, a hint of a smile on her lips. "Fair warning." As if on cue, Penny came racing around the corner, one hand trailing along her guide rail, her ginger curls bouncing. "Is he here? Is the music man here?" "I'm here," and Wade said watched Penny's face light up like sunrise. She crashed into him with a hug that nearly knocked him back a step, her small arms wrapping around his waist. Wade's breath caught, old muscle memory from hugging Caleb rising up. For a moment, he couldn't move. Then his arms came around her, gentle and sure. "Hi, Penny. You're going to teach me? Really teach me? If you want to learn." "I want to." Penny pulled back, her unsighted eyes turned up toward where she sensed his face. They moved to the living room where a beautiful upright piano stood against a wall. New, Wade realized, bought specifically for this. The next hour was one of the strangest of Wade's life. Teaching Penny wasn't like teaching sighted students. She couldn't watch his hands, couldn't read sheet music, couldn't rely on visual cues. But what she lacked in sight, she made up for in pure feeling. "The keys are like a conversation," Wade explained, guiding her small fingers to the right positions. "Each note is a word. When you put them together, they tell a story. What story are we telling? Today, we're telling the story of sunshine after rain." Penny's face scrunched in concentration as she pressed the keys one at a time, following Wade's guidance. The notes were clumsy at first, disconnected, but Wade was patient in a way he hadn't known he could be anymore. He didn't rush her, didn't correct harshly. He just guided. And Penny absorbed everything like a sponge. Elena watched from the doorway, and Wade was acutely aware of her presence. Sometimes he'd glance up and catch her staring, not at Penny, but at him. Her expression was complicated, layered with things he couldn't name. After the lesson, Penny begged for just one more song, and Wade found himself playing for her. Not the lullaby this time, but something new. His fingers found a melody he'd never played before, improvising, letting Penny's joy guide him. It was lighter than the lullaby, brighter. It sounded like hope. When he finished, Penny clapped her hands together. "That one sounded like dancing." "Maybe it was," Wade said softly. His hands were shaking. He'd made it through, barely. Penny had been patient, eager, absorbing everything like she'd been waiting her whole life for this. But Wade felt hollowed out, scraped raw by muscle memory and grief. He stood to leave, already composing the apology text in his head. "I'm sorry, I can't do this again. You were right to ask, and I was wrong to try." "Wade?" Penny's small voice stopped him at the door. He turned. She was still sitting at the piano bench, her unseeing eyes turned toward where she'd heard him move. "Can I ask you something?" Wade's throat was too tight to speak, so he just said, "Sure." "When you play," Penny's small fingers traced the piano keys, not pressing them. "When you play, it sounds like you're talking to someone you love. Can you hear them when you play?" Wade's breath stopped. Penny tilted her head, waiting for an answer she couldn't see but could somehow sense. "Yes," Wade whispered. "I can hear him." "Is that why it's sad and beautiful at the same time?" Wade stood frozen, his heart cracking open in his chest. Because she was right. She'd heard what no one else had, that his music was a conversation with a ghost, that every note was both grief and love. "Yeah," he managed. "That's why." Penny smiled, small and understanding, far too wise for 7 years old. "I'm glad you can still talk to him, even if it hurts." Wade's vision blurred. He blinked hard. "Same time next week?" Penny asked, her voice hopeful but not demanding, like she'd accept either answer. And Wade realized she wasn't asking him to forget Caleb. She wasn't asking him to move on or heal or be someone he wasn't. She was just asking him to keep talking. "Same time next week," Wade heard himself say. Penny's smile could have lit up the whole city. Wade left before the tears could fall, but as he walked to the subway, something had shifted. The grief was still there, would always be there, but for the first time in 4 years, it didn't feel like drowning. It felt like Caleb was listening, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough reason to come back. The lessons continued. Every Saturday afternoon, Wade showed up at Alana's penthouse, and every week Penny progressed faster than seemed possible. She had a natural ear, an intuitive understanding of melody and rhythm that reminded Wade of himself at that age. But more than the lessons, it was the after that started mattering. At first, Wade would leave immediately when the hour was up, but one week Alana asked if he wanted to stay for coffee. Then coffee became dinner. Simple things, takeout eaten while Penny practiced independently in the living room. They talked about safe things at first, Penny's progress, funny moments from the lessons. Gradually, they moved into deeper territory. Wade found himself sharing stories about Caleb he hadn't spoken aloud in years, the way his son used to conduct imaginary orchestras with a wooden spoon. How he demanded the same bedtime song 3 times in a row because it sounds different each time, Daddy. Elena told him about building Lunex from nothing, about the sexism she'd faced, the investors who'd dismissed her, the triumph of proving them all wrong. But also about the loneliness at the top, the way success had cost her friends and relationships. Emotion made me vulnerable. Control made me untouchable, she said one evening, both of them nursing wine while Penny slept. But I'm starting to wonder if I went too far, if I built the walls so high I forgot what they were protecting. I did the same thing, Wade admitted, just with different materials. I built my walls out of invisibility. Yours are made of power. Same result. Nothing gets in. Nothing gets out either. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that comes from being understood. Weeks turned into months. The Saturday lessons became the center of Wade's week, and the dinners afterward became something he looked forward to with an intensity that surprised him. Somewhere in those conversations, Wade and Elena stopped being strangers bound by Penny's needs and became something else entirely. Friends. Or maybe something more that neither was ready to name. 1 year after the gala, Lunex Technologies held its annual charity event again. This time, Wade received a formal invitation as a guest. Elena had asked if he'd consider performing with Penny. "She's ready," Elena had said, "and I think it would mean the world to her." Wade agreed, despite the anxiety, because this wasn't about him anymore. It was about Penny. The night of the gala, Wade stood backstage watching Penny fidget with nervous excitement. "What if I mess up?" she asked, her small hand finding his. "Then you keep playing," Wade said gently. "Music isn't about being perfect. It's about feeling." "Will you be right there?" "The whole time, I promise." Elena appeared in a silver dress that made Wade's mouth go dry. But when she smiled at him, nervous and genuine, she just looked like Elena, the woman who'd somehow become essential to his life. "You both ready?" she asked. "Ready," Penny said firmly. The ballroom was exactly as Wade remembered, but this time, when he and Penny walked out, the applause started before they'd even sat down. Many remembered the janitor who'd calmed the screaming child. Now they watched that same child, poised and confident, take her place beside him. Wade settled onto the bench, Penny beside him. The room quieted. "Hello, everyone," Penny said, her voice surprisingly steady. "My name is Penny Voss, and this is my teacher, Wade. A year ago, I had the scariest moment of my life in this room, but then Wade played me a song, and it saved me. Tonight, we are going to play that song together. This is for everyone who's ever been scared and needed someone to show them it's okay." Wade's throat tightened. They hadn't rehearsed that speech. His hands found the keys, and Penny's fingers settled beside his. Together, they began. The melody was the same, the lullaby Wade had composed for Caleb. But now it was a duet. Wade carried the main theme, while Penny wove in harmonies he'd taught her, her natural talent evident in every note. She made mistakes, hit wrong keys, lost her place once, but she kept going, just like he taught her. The audience was mesmerized, not by perfection, but by the transformation, by the clear bond between teacher and student. Wade watched Penny's face, the concentration, the pure joy. This was why he'd started teaching her. But when he glanced up and saw Elena in the front row, tears streaming down her face, eyes full of something that made his chest ache, Wade realized this was about more than teaching. This was about healing. All of them. The final notes rang out. The silence lasted a heartbeat. Then the room erupted in a standing ovation. Penny turned toward Wade with the biggest smile he'd ever seen. "We did it." "You were perfect," Wade said, his voice rough. "I made mistakes." "Perfect anyway." Over Penny's shoulder, Wade found Elena in the crowd. Their eyes met, and he saw everything he'd been too scared to say. It was time. Late in the evening, when most guests had left, and Penny was asleep on a couch with her nanny nearby, Wade found Elena on a balcony overlooking the city. "Penny was extraordinary tonight," Elena said, without turning. "Because of you." "Because of both of us," Wade corrected. Elena turned to face him, moonlight catching her silver dress. "You gave us both something precious." Wade's heart hammered. The words he'd been holding back for months pressed against his chest, demanding release. "Elena." 12 months, Elena interrupted softly. "It's been 12 months since the first gala, since you walked into our lives and changed everything." Her voice wavered. "And I need to know, do you feel it too? Or is it just me imagining that when we talk until midnight, when you look at me like that, when the silence feels full instead of empty?" Wade crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. He cupped her face in his hands, the way he'd imagined 100 times during those late-night conversations, during those moments when her hand lingered on his shoulder, during every second he'd forced himself to leave before he could do exactly this. "I've been in love with you for months," he said, his voice raw. "I was just too scared to say it." Elena's breath caught. "Wade!" He kissed her. Elena melted into him with a sound that was relief and joy and homecoming all at once. Her hands slid into his hair, holding on like she'd been waiting for this as long as he had. Wade's arms wrapped around her waist, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt like he'd come home. When they finally broke apart, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered again, because once wasn't enough. "I love you, and I'm terrified, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I can't pretend anymore that you're just Penny's mother, or just my friend, or just—" Elena kissed him again, softer this time. "I love you too," she said against his lips. "I have for so long." They stood there, holding each other under the stars, the city lights glittering below like promises. "What happens now?" Wade asked. Elena smiled. "Whatever we want." 2 years became a rhythm. Saturday lessons with Penny evolved into Sunday dinners, then weeknight movie nights, then keys to each other's apartments. Wade quit his janitorial position and started teaching music to other children, kids dealing with loss, with disability, with wounds that words couldn't reach. Elena funded the program through her foundation, watching Wade give other families what he'd given hers. They learned each other slowly. Wade's grief still surfaced on bad days. The anniversary of Caleb's death, a child's laugh that sounded too familiar, songs that hurt too much to play. Elena would find him staring at nothing, lost somewhere she couldn't follow, and she learned to just sit beside him, not to fix it, just to be there. Elena's walls didn't crumble overnight either. She'd catch herself trying to control things, Penny's schedule, Wade's teaching methods, their relationship itself. Wade learned to call her on it gently. "You can't manage love like a quarterly report," he'd say, and she'd realize he was right. They fought sometimes, real fights about real things, but they always came back to the table, always talked it through. Penny bloomed between them like a flower finally getting the right soil and sunlight. Her piano skills grew exponentially, but more than that, her confidence did. The shy, overwhelmed 7-year-old who'd collapsed at that gala became a girl who navigated her world with joy instead of fear. 3 years after that first gala, on a perfect spring afternoon, Wade and Elena got married in a garden ceremony. Small and intimate, just the people who mattered. Penny served as maid of honor, walking down the aisle by sound, following the string quartet's music with a smile that could light up the world. When Elena appeared in a simple white dress, Wade's hands trembled, not from fear this time, from gratitude. Their vows were short. "I choose to live," Elena said, tears streaming, "with you. You brought me back to life. Every day with you is a gift." Penny cried through the whole ceremony. Happy tears, she insisted later. At 10 years old, she finally had what she'd been asking for, a real family. The Brooklyn brownstone became their home. It had a music room where Penny practiced for hours and Wade composed new pieces. A kitchen where the 3 of them cooked terrible dinners together and laughed about it. A garden where Elena's herbs somehow survived despite her best efforts to kill them. Wade started composing again, small pieces at first, a melody inspired by Elena's laugh, a suite capturing Penny's journey from that screaming 7-year-old to the confident young woman she was becoming, and finally, the piece he'd been avoiding, a proper goodbye to Caleb. He cried through writing every note, but when it was finished, it felt like setting down a weight he'd carried too long. Elena softened in ways that surprised everyone who knew her. She still ran Lunax with brilliant precision, but she smiled more, took actual vacations, started a mentorship program for young women in tech. The Ice Queen reputation thawed, replaced by something warmer, something real. Penny's gift for music continued to astound them. By 12, she'd won her first major youth competition. By 15, she was performing in regional concert halls, her name appearing in classical music publications. Teachers used words like extraordinary and once-in-a-generation talent. But Wade was careful never to push. He'd seen too many young musicians burned out by pressure, by parents living through their children's success. So he kept Penny's love of music pure, let her explore what she loved, made sure she had friends, hobbies, a life beyond the piano. When Penny turned 16, she sat her parents down at dinner one evening, her hands fidgeting with her napkin, a tell that she was nervous. "I've been thinking about college," she said. Elena and Wade exchanged glances. "And," Elena prompted gently,
I want to study music, really study it, not just lessons here and there. I want, Penny paused, gathering courage. I want to audition for music conservatories, Juilliard, Manhattan School of Music, maybe Curtis if I'm brave enough. I want to be a concert pianist. Wade felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with pride so fierce it almost hurt. Are you sure? He asked. It's not an easy path, Penny. The competition is brutal, the pressure. I know, Penny interrupted, her voice steady, but you taught me that music isn't about being perfect. It's about having something to say. And I have things to say, Wade. I want to tell stories that help people the way your music helped me. The echo of his own philosophy coming back to him weighed like a wave. Elena reached across the table and took Penny's hand. Then we'll support you, whatever you need. That was 2 years ago. 2 years of intensive preparation, private coaching sessions, recording audition tapes, Penny practicing until her fingers ached, but always with joy, never obligation. College application essays where she wrote about being blind, about music as her language, about a janitor who'd saved her life by playing a song. They'd submitted applications to 5 schools, waited through the agonizing months of silence, and then, 3 weeks ago, the acceptance letters started arriving. The letter from Juilliard came on a Tuesday. Wade found it in the mail, the thick envelope that meant good news, and his hands actually shook as he held it. He didn't open it. This moment belonged to Penny. He called Elena at work. It's here. I'm leaving now, she said, and he heard her voice crack. They waited together in the living room, the envelope on the coffee table like a promise. When Penny came home from her part-time job at the community music center, teaching piano to younger kids, following in Wade's footsteps, she knew immediately. Is that? Open it, Elena said, her hand gripping Wade's so tight it almost hurt.
Penny's fingers found the envelope, traced the embossed logo she couldn't see but had memorized from the brochures they'd read together. She opened it carefully, pulled out the letter, and handed it to Wade. "Read it to me," she whispered. Wade's voice shook as he read, "Dear Miss Voss, congratulations. On behalf of the admissions committee, I am delighted to offer you admission to the Juilliard School." He didn't get any further before Penny screamed, pure joy, no fear this time, and launched herself at both of them. The 3 of them collapsed into a heap on the couch, laughing and crying and holding each other. "You did it," Elena kept saying, tears streaming down her face. "Baby, you did it." "We did it," Penny corrected, pulling back to find Wade's face with her hands. "I wouldn't be here without you, without both of you." Wade couldn't speak. He just held his daughter, because that's what she was in every way that mattered. His son would have loved Penny, would have been so proud. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it didn't hurt the way it used to. It had transformed into something else, something that felt almost like peace. The next 2 months passed in a blur of preparation, shopping for dorm essentials, Penny practicing even more intensely, wanting to be ready, long conversations late at night about homesickness and independence and how FaceTime worked. Wade composed a new piece, a gift for Penny to take with her. He called it Fearless, and it captured everything: her crisis at 7, her growth, her courage, her future. He played it for her 1 week before move-in day, and she cried through the entire performance. "Will you write it down for me?" she asked. "In Braille music notation? I want to learn it." "Already done," Wade said, handing her the pages he'd spent weeks transcribing. Elena tried not to cry every time she walked past Penny's room, seeing the packed boxes, the empty spaces where posters used to hang. Her baby was leaving. Her miracle girl who'd survived so much was flying. The morning they loaded the car, Elena's composure finally cracked. "I'm not ready," she whispered to Wade while Penny was saying goodbye to the neighbor's cat. "I thought I would be, but I'm not." Wade pulled her close. "Neither am I, but she is, and that's what matters." The drive to Manhattan took 40 minutes that felt like 4. Penny sat in the back seat, her fingers drumming nervously on her knee, playing invisible piano keys, working through anxiety the way she always did, through music. Wade kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, memorizing this moment. His daughter, 18 years old, heading off to Juilliard. If someone had told him 11 years ago, when he was a broken janitor pushing a cart through empty hallways, that this would be his life, he never would have believed them. They pulled up to the residence hall, and suddenly it was real. Students everywhere, parents hauling mini fridges and desk lamps, the organized chaos of move-in day. Wade helped Penny navigate to her room, 3rd floor, end of the hall, a corner unit with good acoustics she'd requested. Her roommate hadn't arrived yet. The space was small, sterile, impersonal, but Penny moved through it with her cane, mapping it out, already making it hers. "The bed's by the window. I can feel the sun. That's good. I'll put my music stand here, my sound system there." Elena was trying so hard not to cry that she'd gone completely silent. They spent 2 hours setting up. Wade assembled the desk chair that came in 17 pieces. Elena organized Penny's closet by texture so she could find things easily. Penny arranged her Braille music library, her keyboard, the recording equipment Wade had bought her as a graduation gift. Finally, there was nothing left to do. The room was ready. Penny was ready. It was time to say goodbye. Elena broke first. She pulled Penny into a hug so tight Wade worried she'd never let go. "I'm so proud of you," Elena whispered against Penny's hair. "So incredibly proud. You're going to be amazing." "I'm going to make mistakes," Penny said, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "Good. That means you're trying." Elena pulled back, framing Penny's face with her hands. "Call me every day, even if it's just for 2 minutes. Promise me." "I promise, Mom." Elena stepped back, wiping her eyes, and it was Wade's turn. He looked at Penny, this young woman who'd somehow become his daughter, who'd saved him by letting him save her, who was about to step into a future so bright it hurt to look at directly. "You remember what I told you? That first lesson? 11 years ago?" Penny smiled. "Music isn't about being perfect. It's about feeling. And sometimes you have to play through the fear to find the beautiful parts." Wade's voice cracked. "That's right. So when it gets hard, and it will get hard, you play through it. You keep going, just like you did that night at the gala." Penny threw her arms around him, and Wade held her, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. He thought about Caleb, about all the moments they'd never have. The grief was still there, sharp and real. But standing here, holding Penny, Wade realized something. Loving her didn't diminish what he'd had with Caleb. It honored it. It proved that his heart was big enough for both grief and joy, for memory and present, for loss and new love. "Thank you," Penny whispered, "for playing that song, for not giving up on music, for being my dad." "Thank you," Wade whispered back, "for giving me a reason to play again." Penny pulled away, wiping her eyes. "Okay, you two need to leave before I completely lose it and beg you to take me home." Elena laughed through her tears. "You're going to be fine." "I know," Penny said, and the confidence in her voice was real. "I'm terrified, but I'm ready." They walked to the door. Wade looked back one more time. Penny standing in her dorm room, her cane in hand, a smile on her face, despite the tears on her cheeks. She waved. "I love you both." "We love you too," Elena and Wade said in unison. Then they walked down the hallway, down the stairs, out of the building. Each step felt heavier than the last. They made it to the car before Elena completely broke down. Wade held her while she sobbed against his chest in the parking lot, not caring who saw. He stroked her hair and let her cry, his own tears falling silently. "She's going to be okay. Better than okay. She's going to be extraordinary." "I know," Elena choked out. "That's not why I'm crying." "Then why?" Elena pulled back, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Because she doesn't need us anymore. We did our job too well. We made her brave enough to leave." Wade smiled through his own tears. "That's exactly what we were supposed to do." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the parking lot, watching other families say their goodbyes, feeling the bittersweet ache of letting go. Finally, they got in the car. Wade started the engine, but didn't put it in drive. He just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. The silence stretched. Elena reached over and squeezed his hand. "You okay?" "Yeah," Wade said softly. "Just 11 years ago, I was a janitor pushing a cart through empty hallways. I'd given up on everything. Music, love, hope. I was just existing. And now," his voice caught, "now I have you. I have Penny. I have a life I never thought I'd get to live." "Present tense," Elena corrected gently. "You have her. She's at college, not gone." Wade smiled. "Right. She's just growing up." "Too fast," muttered Elena. Wade pulled out of the parking spot, navigating toward the exit. The city stretched out before them, traffic and noise and millions of people living their lives. Somewhere behind them, Penny was starting her new chapter. Somewhere ahead, Wade and Elena's next chapter waited. At a red light, Wade glanced over at Elena. She was staring out the window, her expression distant. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Elena turned to him with a small smile. "That our house is going to be so quiet. No piano practice at 7 a.m., no Penny asking what's for dinner while she's standing right in front of the fridge, no teenager drama about auditions or roommates." Wade felt the truth of it settle in his chest. Empty nest. Very empty. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at him with something playful flickering in her eyes. "So what do we do now?" Wade opened his mouth, then closed it. It was a good question. For 11 years, their lives had revolved around Penny, her lessons, her competitions, her needs, her dreams. For the first time in a long time, it was just the two of them. "I don't know. What do you want to do?" Elena's smile widened. "Travel, take vacations, sleep in on Saturdays, have breakfast in bed, visit every jazz club in New York, learn to cook something besides pasta, dance in the living room at midnight." She reached over and took his hand. "Fall in love with you all over again?" Wade felt his chest warm. "That sounds perfect." "It does, doesn't it?" Elena squeezed his hand. "We did good, Wade. We raised an incredible young woman. Now it's our turn." The light turned green. Wade pressed the gas, merging into traffic, heading home to their Brooklyn brownstone that would feel too big and too quiet tonight, but also full of possibility. Behind them, Penny was stepping into her future, brave and talented and loved. Ahead of them, Wade and Elena's next chapter was just beginning, a chapter they'd write together, no longer defined by the grief that had brought them together, but by the love they'd chosen to build. Wade glanced at Elena, saw the way the afternoon light caught her profile, the way she was smiling despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. "I love you," he said. "I love you too." Elena lifted their joined hands and kissed his knuckles. "Now drive. We have a whole life to figure out what comes next." So, Wade drove. And somewhere in the music building at Juilliard, Penny Voss unpacked her keyboard, set up her music stand, and sat down to play. Her fingers found the keys, muscle memory and love guiding them, and she began the piece Wade had written for her. Fearless. The notes filled her small dorm room, spilled out into the hallway, reached the ears of passing students who paused to listen, beautiful and bold and full of hope. 3 broken people who'd found each other in a crystal ballroom 11 years ago, who'd learned that sometimes the person who saves you is the last one you'd ever expect, who'd discovered that love wasn't about being perfect, it was about showing up, about choosing each other, about playing through the fear to find the beautiful parts. Wade had stepped forward when he could have stayed hidden, had touched a piano when he could have kept running, had whispered 6 words, "Can I play you a song?" that changed 3 lives forever. That choice didn't just calm a crisis. It awakened 3 broken hearts and proved that even after your world shatters, you can build something beautiful from the pieces. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please don't let it end here. Let it remind you, kindness still matters, compassion still changes lives, and hope is never wasted. Subscribe and be part of our Soul Lift Stories family, where every story lifts the spirit and reminds us that light always finds its way back. And if this moment moved you, share it, because sometimes sharing hope is the kindest thing we can do.